We have now launched the online Shockwave course. When I set the company up, which is over 12 years ago now, which is hard to believe, I was always about educating the clinicians as well, not just in terms of the technology. So when Dom Smith came to me with this idea of doing the Shockwave course, I was all for it. And Dom and Katie have done a fantastic job of putting it together. It's really impressive, really comprehensive. It is technology agnostic, so whatever system you're using will be able to help you with this. So it's a brilliant piece of work. The guys have done really well. So check it out and go to the link below and let us know what you think. So this week's episode of Leading the Field is with managing partner at Forbes Solicitors, Pauline Wild. Pauline's a good friend of mine and we were in a business group together, and we talked about some of the insights from a legal perspective of what it's like working in healthcare. We covered topics such as intellectual property, acquiring new clinics and businesses, as well as some general things to consider. So I hope you enjoy the session and let us know what you think in the comments. Pauline, great to see you.
Hi, great to see you too.
So thank you for coming in. So we know each other well from our Vistage group. And I've always been really impressed with the way that you being managing partner at Forbes Solicitors. But just I think in general, I think you're a really impressive person with the way that you deal with things. And I think you can add a lot to our clients in the healthcare industry, just talking about the law and just some other considerations for them to have. So just as a general overview, just give us a bit of background about what you do and just delve into any things that you think might be a good starting point for us.
Yeah, of course, no problem. So, as you say, I'm Pauline Wild, managing partner of Forbes Solicitors. Forbes is a full-service law firm, so we cover many legal specialisms across the consumer world, so interpersonal injury, wills, trusts and probate, conveyancing, crime, family. And then we specialise in commercial law as well. So we do corporate work, commercial property work, commercial litigation, commercial intellectual property. And then we have a public sector division as well that specialises in defendant insurance matters and also housing and education. So it's a real wide spectrum of work. We are between... I'm going to edge my bets for a £24 million turnover business, and that's where we'll be at the end of this financial year. We've got just close to 400 employees and approximately 50 partners within the business. So predominantly based out of Lancashire, got offices in Manchester and also Leeds, and we see ourselves as a very strong regional law firm with clients nationally. So that's what I do. My background is as a corporate lawyer. So I've been there at Forbes now for 23 years. So my specialism was in the M&A world, so mergers and acquisitions, acting for clients who were building their portfolio of businesses and then selling, or right to that from startup businesses as well. So, and I have some understanding of commercial law as well, because when I first qualified, I did corporate law and commercial law. So at Forbes, we do various levels of specialisms across healthcare. So there's lots that spans across it. And obviously I wouldn't want to go into great details now of all of those areas. But predominantly in healthcare, you're looking at business structures. That's going to be really important. So let's say, for your business specifically, talking to physios, it's really important that they understand the legal structure in which they run their business and what protective mechanisms they can put in place. If they're looking at growing, expanding, buying physio practices, they'll need good lawyers on hand to be able to give them advice as to the most flexible kind of structure that they can use that will be most suitable for them. Commercial law will massively play within the healthcare industry, specifically yours as well. So when you're purchasing products, making sure you've got those the correct commercial agreements, distribution agreements in place, again, that you're protected as far as you possibly can. And then into the realms of intellectual property, which is a fascinating topic, one that personally I've not got masses of experience in. But when businesses are buying products that have intellectual property or they are innovating products, then it's hugely important to protect that asset. And you can do that by various ways of protecting intellectual property. There's all sorts of different rights. It can be a patent, it can be a registered design right, it can be copyright, trademarks. There's all sorts of different rights that you can protect, and that itself has value. So again, I would recommend for your clients, intellectual property will be probably key.
Right, yeah, no, there's a couple of things there particularly. So I think the MSK world, so sports injury area, private here now, mainly because the NHS is struggling, is there's a massive opportunity in the private market. So we're seeing massive growth. So it's really exciting. We love being in the hub of all of that. And we are seeing quite a few practices are expanding, more business coming into the area. There's a lot more acquisitions,
Yeah.
and some, not that they're big companies, but bigger companies are acquiring other sites and facilities. So you touched on that, when there's mergers, when there's
Yeah.
acquisitions. You just give us a bit more information in terms of what if you were looking to, say, expand or take on another practice, looking at buying another
Yeah.
practice. Where would you even start with that?
See, I always say with that preparedness, I would say, is always the best way. So if you have your strategy and you know your strategy is I'm on an acquisition trail, so you've got to have, what is it that I'm looking for? How is it going to bolster my business? How is that going to get us to the next step in our strategy, in our business plan? And then I've said that in talks, and then clients have stood up and said, we were prepared in any way, and the acquisition worked for us. So sometimes opportunities can come along and they can obviously outweigh a risk of not being prepared for something. But generally, it's around your strategy. If you can then identify a business that fits well with your strategy, will enable you to get into that next stage of growth, will of course add value onto the bottom line, then that's the first step. And then you need to do what lawyers call due diligence. So you need to really look into the business. And what you're looking for when you're doing due diligence is you're looking for what risks are there that's in the business, and do the benefits of the acquisition outweigh the risks. So you'll do some due diligence, and that can be financial due diligence and legal due diligence as well. So it's about getting that trusted advisor team around you. So using your accountants to make sure that the financial information that's coming through, there's no risks involved in that. And then again, getting your lawyers involved to look at all of the information that's coming through to identify any risks. Then once you've done that, there's a legal process to go through. There's always employees involved that, again, can be a massive positive, but there can also be concerns there as well. Do the values in that business, do they match the values in the business that you own? How will that all work together? Do they use different systems? How will the systems integrate with each other? So lots of practical matters to consider, as well as actually the bottom line number as well. But if you can get all those aligned to a degree, then I'm fascinated by the M&A world, and there's lots of reasons why I'm concerned about the budget that's coming at the end of October, because we need to make sure that M&A activity can carry on in this country as much as possible. I think M&A adds a fresh impetus in business. People can sell, they can buy, and if you are merging, you're growing, you tend to be on a bit of a mission, and that brings with it so many fresh ideas and just keeps the economy turning.
Right. So what are you concerned about in the budget coming up? What is it?
There's a couple of things. So there's something called capital gains tax now, which I'm sure you'll have heard of, that if you sell your business, then you're subject to a particular rate of tax on capital gains. There are reliefs that are available at the moment for entrepreneurs and business owners, and there's talk in pre-budget, scaremongering I might say, but then some of it will be truth as well, that they will enhance that capital gains tax so significantly that people will either not sell, or they'll start to move abroad and domicile themselves abroad so that they're not going to be subject to our tax regime. So that will stop for a certain period M&A activity, which is a concern, because then you might have people staying owners of businesses that actually aren't motivated. They haven't got that fresh impetus. They want to sell, and somebody wants to buy them to actually grow that business and keep the economy turning. So Concerned about CGT. I'm hoping that if they do move it, they move it not too significantly to still continue all the M&A activity. And then the other one is inheritance tax. So in inheritance tax, there's another relief called business property relief, where you can actually transfer your shares on death around your family estate and get some business property relief. And they're talking about removing that as well. Which again will cause some significant problems. So I'm a little bit concerned about that, because the M&A world is a fascinating world, and there's more and more money coming into our country from overseas as well. They want to invest here, especially since the election. That's grown. We've seen plenty of transactions from American investors, American buyers, some European buyers and investors, and it's great when the world is turning in that kind of way.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that you've got a very positive outlook and fresh, which is definitely in line with where I'm at, and I really think the market, particularly in our area, is flying at the moment, and it's only going to go up. However, like just to touch on this, and it's not necessarily in your legal capacity now, but like you talk about missions, values.
Yep.
You're a really impressive person. We spent a lot of time together over the last couple of years. How would you say is a good way to look at aligning those values if you're looking at acquiring something? Because we're looking at this all the time for various different things which we think would complement us as well as the market. But what other considerations beyond the legal, just from like a mission, purpose, and values?
I think that's a really good question. And for me, I used to say this to clients all the time. You need to have your kind of like figure out before you do your transaction, what are the things that I'm prepared to move on. So let's say it's a sale now, so it's a disposal. A client's coming to me and saying, right, I'm looking to sell, but I want to find a buyer that has got the same values as what our business has, because that's really important to culture. And because I want the business to retain its culture. I want the employees to still want to work there. I want it to feel the same, if not better. Right, okay, so you start to look down and go, right, let's get down what your desires are out of this transaction. You could find a buyer that may offer you a bit more, but what happens if their values aren't aligned with yours? So through the due diligence process, you identify that they're much more corporate than you are. They're a bit more cutthroat than you are. Their values don't resonate with yours. So let's say one of your values is around relationships. They may say, well, no, we're not bothered about relationships. We're bothered about driving through performance. So you might go, right, okay, well, are you then as a buyer prepared to take that at the risk of some of your employees therefore potentially losing their job or having to work so much harder against in a more corporate environment, of which more ruthless in terms of their management style? Or are you prepared to take less and find somebody whose values are purely aligned with yours? But you will only know that by spending as much time as you possibly can with the buyer, with the seller, to actually identify, are your values truly aligned or are they not? You know as well as I do that businesses can put all of their values on the walls, the mugs, everything. But if it doesn't actually mean anything to the business, then it's a bit irrelevant. So you've got to try and find out that business owner. They've been really important in terms of passing values down into the business. So what are their values? And if I'm selling or if I'm buying, can we, by getting to know each other, can we find some alignment?
So there's no objective way of doing that other than it's just human interaction,
Absolutely.
Talking to them and doing it. So have you got any, I presume you have got experience of when people have actually realised quite a long way down the line, this is not for me or not for us?
Yeah, seen that happen so many times. One actually not that long ago, probably just coming up to about 6 or 7 months ago, one of our quite sizable commercial clients was going down the road of looking for some investment, and they got to a particular point and realised that the investors, it just wasn't for them. But it's absolutely the right thing to do. But then also what they've said is they've learned so much from it. Yeah, it's taken so much time, it takes commitment, it's expensive. but one key point to come from it is what they didn't do is take their eye off the business. You can never do that in a transaction. If you're looking to sell or looking to buy, you've got to make sure that there's a process and there's people in place to consistently keep their eye on the business,
the current business,
day-to-day business, and the operational part of the business, because you can't afford to lose that, because ultimately that's where your value lies in your business.
I guess that's on both sides of it, isn't it?
Both sides, yeah, absolutely, yeah, on both sides. But you can learn a lot from that process, and you can actually learn a lot more about you, and you can actually learn a lot more about your business by getting to the point of going, actually, we're not aligned. Okay, well, what does that tell me? That tells me that I am either still ready to do some sort of merger or disposal or acquisition, but it has to be with somebody who has these particular characteristics and has this particular strategy.
And this may not be a question, maybe more of an accountancy question, but how do you value companies?
Oh gosh, yeah, there's so many different ways, and it is more of an accountancy question. But there are lots of different ways you can value it on your balance sheet. You can also value it in terms of multiples. It's called a multiple, and sometimes some businesses are really value in the economy and in the industry at that particular time. So at the minute, tech, AI, their values, their multiples are super high. They may not be in 10, 15 years' time. Who knows? I'm sure they still will be. But there'll be businesses whose multiples will drive a higher number than others will. So that is a question for what sector are you in? Ultimately, what is somebody prepared to pay?
Yeah, I was at an event yesterday, and you can just tell companies are throwing AI at everything now. So that is, even if I'm skeptical on some of it, just saying you're doing AI, people obviously it's the word or the expression of the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, and in our sector, it's very much it's there. But again, I'm with you. It's embrace it. Let's not run too quickly. Let's identify what tools and pieces of software that we can use that can help utilize efficiencies within the business. But let's not forget that clients do still love the human interaction. So for me, AI will only replace those lawyers that don't use it. So I think if you can get a lawyer that can use AI well and still use human interaction, that's where you'll see the major benefits.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with that. So like we work with tech, medical devices when people are using it, and a lot of people are hesitant because it's like, oh, well, no, they love my hands, they love, and it's like you never ever lose that. That's always going to be the first port of call, and it's just how you're supplementing it. So it's the same with AI, really, isn't it? This stuff is only meant to help you and ultimately your clients with what they're looking to achieve. And so from just like a practical perspective for you, so in our world, AI is being used. ChatGPT is definitely being used in marketing and so on. There's other softwares that are being used within clinic records so that they can document treatment. So they can be talking, and it's pulling all the data, pulling it into a really concise format, which is really cool. It allows clinicians to not need to have to be doing their admin, which no one particularly enjoys doing anyway. Are there any other bits of things that you use just practically that have been helpful within your industry from an AI perspective?
Yeah, there's quite a lot that we're using at the moment, again, across the different sectors. So there's particular software in property that's actually really good. So when you're buying a house, for example, your lawyer will prepare a report based on the title of that property, and it will talk to you about all the rights in connection with the property, all the risks in connection with the property, what all your searches have told you about the local area. And solicitors used to have to read all of that and then prepare a report. Now it comes through into a piece of software. The software reads it all and produces a report. It saves hours. And also from a risk perspective, the reports now are pages and pages long, so they're clearly identifying every single risk. So major benefit for us. There's also, I won't go into all the different types of software that we're using, but one of the risks for lawyers is client data is so confidential. So we need to make sure that when we're putting client data into AI, that it's being protected by all the GDPR rules. So it is a minefield for us as lawyers, and we don't like taking risks as many other businesses are a bit more keen to embrace risk. In our industry, we're not so. But there are many pieces of software. I use ChatGPT a fair bit. Since I know you and I have had a course, and since I've actually learned how to use it in the best way possible, I've found ChatGPT brilliant. But again, it's getting ideas and then using your own brain to develop it from there. So I think it can take you to a stage, but then human interaction, human intelligence, human emotion can take it that stage further, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. It's all there's always developments. There's always things that push forward. Computers, etc. So I think it's how it all fits together. But ultimately, humans are always at the hub of everything, aren't they? And that's not going to change.
No.
Wouldn't have thought in our lifetime.
No.
And then just going, you mentioned about IP, so that's another area which I think is really interesting, and we're seeing loads more devices being created. We're working with another physio group on a new device, and I'm in this process now where we're looking at maybe getting some grant funding, but we need to have the IP for the device, or intellectual property. So what's your advice for people that say have got an idea for a product?
Yeah, okay, so with that, the IP is vast, but it's where in some businesses, it's where the true value actually is. And if it's not protected properly, then you can lose your value literally overnight. So whatever idea you've got, whatever concept you've got, my advice would be to seek some advice from an intellectual property lawyer, and also potentially a patent attorney as well. So patent attorneys aren't lawyers. They are people that are actually specifically trained and qualified to write patent applications.
Okay.
So lawyers only advise on patents where it's about the distribution of the product itself. So the product has had its patent application granted, and then there's value in that product. So the lawyer then will advise on how you can commercialise that in terms of pulling together distribution agreements, manufacturing agreements, whatever it may be. But what lawyers do is trademarking, design rights, copyright. So there's all sorts of other different ways of securing your intellectual property, and you just got to make sure you protect it as much as you possibly can. And there's other bits of advice of where the value is in that product, in that intellectual property. Hold it in a different company so that it's always protected by the corporate veil of a separate limited company, rather than owning the product within your main business structure. So you hold it in a sister company or in a subsidiary, and it licenses it to your main company. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can do it to protect the value in those products. So yeah, I would absolutely say if there's any intellectual property that's being created, they need to seek that advice to make sure that they can contain that value and then maximise on that value. So I would just say, just make sure you seek the advice of an intellectual property lawyer. They will advise you the rights that you should be looking at to protect that product as much as possible, in terms of making sure, okay, get my intellectual property rights, and then should I be holding it outside of the company? Should I be licensing it back in? What should I be doing with it? And then once you've got the IP protected, it's then about commercialising it and maximising the value, and a lawyer can advise you in respect of all of that. And if they need to speak to a patent attorney, obviously they'll pass you on to a patent attorney as well.
Right. How have you seen just the industry in terms of creation of new products, of M&A, that sort of thing? Have you seen a change, a growth, a reduction in activity going on, or where do you see the market? Because it feels like there's a lot more SMEs that are being created.
Absolutely. Like we would say them. So we're a regional law firm. So where we see ourselves in the market is your SMEs, your smaller PLCs. There's a mass of work, creation, innovation in that arena. So much M&A activity. Our corporate team have been the busiest they've ever been in the last 2 years. And the same with our commercial team. They're just growing and growing. And there's so much more intellectual property, a little bit of a pitch, but There's something called Legal 500, where in the Legal 500 it has all the law firms in it and it identifies their specialisms, and we've got in there for the first time this year in respect of intellectual property. We've been in it for all our other commercial services for a while, but we're now in there as recommended for our intellectual property advice. And that just goes to show that we've created a specialism alongside our other commercial divisions that's just continued to grow. And like I say, it's been, for me, it's been the last 2 to 3 years, there's so much movement in that marketplace. And I think there's so much that's gone on for us as people, isn't there? And as business owners, that I think there's a lot of resilience, and they've gone, okay, there's clearly something else coming around the corner, because there's always something. We're always having to deal with something. So I'm just going to crack on, and I'm just going to crack on and do the best at what I can do with my business, and try and ignore the negativity of the media, of the world, which is really hard, because obviously it can affect us all, and in many businesses it can impact on parts of your business. But, and I know it's a real big generalisation, but I do feel that SMEs have gone, I'm just going to crack on regardless. We're going to absolutely make the most of what we can with our business and with the marketplace, despite what's going on in the world, which is a positive mindset to have, but maybe difficult for some businesses where they are directly impacted.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more on it, and that's one of the reasons why I like doing this podcast, really, is we had Roger Martin Fagg talking about the economy, and he's so positive about the future of it. And I think the media is pretty awful, really, like when you listen to it, watch it, whatever it is. And I think it does have an impact, particularly in the world that we're in. So it's small businesses normally in these physio practices where people are, it's not like there's massive in terms of it's not making a fortune all the time. So it's quite fine margins on it. However, there is big opportunity to develop it. And I definitely agree, there's loads of opportunities. And I think getting that mindset of thinking what you could be doing, people are becoming far more optimistic and thinking, actually, forget what's being said on the media. There's opportunities, whether it's for acquiring new practices, for growing, recruiting more people. Like the NHS used to really hold all of that sports injury MSK market, whereas now they can't really do much. So I think it's trying to get that balance between growing but also protecting yourself, where you're not too at risk of expanding too quickly or putting yourself at risk that way.
Yeah. I mean, we have seen that as well, where businesses have grown too quickly, and that can be real pressure on your cash flow ultimately, is where you can get to with that. But I think the word that we came across at the last Vistage session has struck with me, which was the perma crisis. That's what it, and when you look back, you go, yeah, it has been, hasn't it? Like every day, and there's something that's going on, and there's something negative every time you switch on the news. And now, again, I remember from our last session that the actual news in COVID was all about the number of deaths. And when you think about that, it's such a really sad and negative, and if you're doom scrolling and you're seeing it, and it's, so what we see from our client base and what I really try to instill within our own business is a thinking big attitude. Try and think positive instead of, because as lawyers we can be really quite pessimistic and negative in terms of, the reason why that is because a client comes to you and says, I want to sell my business, and we'll go, okay, that's great, brilliant, okay. And then naturally you start to think, how can I protect my client's money? How can I protect my client's business and his money in the contract, because I don't trust the buyer? And it's quite a negative thought process, but that's what happens. That's what we are. We're there to identify the risks. So it's quite negative. But I would say in our business, and when you're talking to your clients and you're thinking about your own career and you're thinking about how you can develop, how you can grow your client base, you've got to switch your thought process to, if somebody says, do you want to take this job on? Don't be thinking, oh no, I can't because I've got X, Y, Z to deal with. Think, what opportunities could I get if I took that job on? What other opportunities are out there for me? And try and think big, try and think positively. But like we've just said, it is hard when everything surrounding you can feel a little bit more negative. But we feel from our client base that they are just going, regardless, we're going for it.
Yeah, no, that's really good to hear, and I think it is. You guys are in that interesting position where protection, it's quite a negative word when you think of it, isn't it? Really. However, you want to have security, you want to have that side of it. If you can flip it and think, actually, it's like going into when you're meeting someone. If you think, I don't like this person, whatever attitude you go into it with, that's going to be reflective of the relationship that probably comes from it.
That's why I used to love doing corporate deals, and I think that's why I got myself to a point where I was quite good at it, was that never lose sight of what the purpose of the deal is. So let's say the client is looking to sell the business. They found a good buyer. They've spent loads of time, due diligence, getting to know this person. They know all of their employees, their team. They know they're all going to be happy working with this buyer. And it means that they can go on and have 15, 20 years of a lovely retirement with their family, get to do all of the bucket list of all the things that they've created. That's what you've got to remember when you're trying to do a deal. Don't get bogged down in the complexities of how a clause is drafted. And I used to find myself in roundtable meetings where the lawyers were arguing about a comma being in the wrong place, and I used to think, don't get dragged into it. Think about the bigger picture, because ultimately there are definitely provisions within a contract that you've got to fight for your client for, but ultimately pick your battles, and then the small things, just think of the bigger picture and what you're actually there to do for your client. Because I've seen deals fall over where solicitors have got involved and taken it, it's got too negative a process, and deals have fallen over because of that, and that's not principally what we're there to do.
It's funny, isn't it? Because it's like it seems so obvious when you think of it. Why wouldn't you go into something positively? Like, how do you win, whatever it may be on it? And yet so many people in any sort of interaction, we know it as salespeople, people are like scared to talk to you. What you're trying to dupe them. There's a lot of just stigma and negativity around maybe quite a lot of business, really, when you think of it.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how I think your approach is certainly the way that I would endorse as well, is like, actually, what could we do here, rather than what can we avoid doing here?
Absolutely. What could we do? Yeah. And that's where I used to always, when you're starting off with a client in terms of the corporate transaction, identify what they're looking for out of it. Find out from your client, okay, what skeletons have you got in your closet? Tell me now the problems that you've encompassed as a business. Tell me what's there. So, for example, there can be ones where, right, okay, well, somebody left about 6 weeks ago. We think they might have a big discrimination claim against us because this XYZ happened in the business. Great, okay, now I know. And I used to say, tell me everything. Don't let me find out from the buyer's lawyer, because that then leaves me in a position where I can't fight your corner. I need to know the pitfalls of the deal so that I know exactly which battles to fight and which ones I can say to you, right, okay, you're going to need to accept that might have an impact on value. They may look at your business and go, right, okay, there's a potential claim there for 100 grand. So we're going to want to knock off 50, 60, 70,000 pounds because of the risk of this potential claim coming forwards. If I know about it and I can advise you what's coming around the corner, that negativity is kind of eliminated at the start, if that makes sense, rather than going down the road and then negativity getting embroiled in the transaction, which it needs and should be a positive experience. Potentially a stressful one for people. They say it's more stressful than selling a house, which is obviously quite stressful, and it can be. They reckon up to 10 times more stressful than selling a house, which is obviously quite a stressful thing to go through. But if you can get the mentality right of why you're doing the deal in the first place, it will get to a good conclusion.
Yeah, no, I think you can relate that to so many different things, really, isn't it? Whatever you're going into, is that thinking, what's the upside. You're doing this for a reason.
Yeah.
It's not thinking about what's the cost of this, what am I paying. Da, 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 da. It's like, no, we're doing it for this, and it's going to push us on to do this.
Yeah.
And it's having that.
But I'm aware of the risk.
Yeah.
But it's like, I'm aware of it. I'm informed about it. But let's not go on about that, because actually this far outweighs that risk. So let's carry on thinking big and thinking positively.
Yeah. And even like we're working with these people rather than we're
against each
that
other.
confrontational side of things.
Yeah. Which is, again, another thing that when I was training the corporate lawyers is pick up the phone to the other side. That's what they're called. So the lawyers on the other side, pick up the phone, engage, build a relationship with the lawyer rather than email. You can find there's a lot of keyboard warriors, and they'll send negative emails, passive aggressive emails, maybe even sometimes directly aggressive emails. But actually, if you've kicked off your conversation and your relationship with that lawyer on the other side in a way that is, look, let's work together to get this deal over the line for our respective clients, you can have a much better outcome for everybody involved. But that's, for you and I, speaking on the phone is a skill set that we've always had, but now it's a lot of the younger generation coming through. Speaking on the phone isn't always necessarily their way of communication or their strongest skill sets by way of communication. So it's just about working with your different skill sets.
I think people are terrified sometimes, and even they're not always young people. Like if we're interacting with them and they're looking at buying something or whatever, and they don't want to, for whatever reason, speak to you on the phone, and it's like, well, let's just get it done, whatever it is. Hopefully we can sort it. If you can't, then so be it. It is much easier. You can hear the way people speak. You can pick up a lot more than just, well, literally whatever anyone writes, anyone could have written that, couldn't they? Whereas when you're speaking to them, you pick up tonality and
absolutely
expression.
And that's back to like AI and everything, isn't it? That you can't get tonality and emotion from anything like that. But it's a concept that I generally live by, and I think with maturity have accepted that I need to embrace it more and more, which is just try and deal with things as easily as possible. So like that, if you've come across a situation, you think, why are they just not speaking to me? Just pick up the phone and just say, is everything all right? Can we just have a chat? I'd like to talk through some of the issues that I think may be apparent between us. Let's just chat it through, because otherwise things are being dealt with on email. People aren't saying what they want to say. And as in our Vistage group, one of the phrases that comes from that, people are then living in your head rent free, because you're trying to think, what is that person thinking? What actually is the issue here? But if you've just asked, it doesn't have to be confrontational. And that's what I'm learning more and more as I'm growing up. Just let things be easy. Just try and talk things through a bit more and tackle things when they happen, rather than letting it inflate into something that it didn't need to be. And also letting opportunities pass you by. Like with that, you've got a customer on the phone who's not speaking to you on the phone. Someone in your organisation might think, oh, I'll just move on to the next customer. But actually, if you'd addressed it and maybe found out what the issue was, you still might have been able to do a deal.
Yeah. And if you believe in what you're doing, it's like you want them to work with you because you know what you're offering is good. And it's like, we know we can help you with this. And that's the way I feel and we feel in that instance. Like even internally, I think we were talking earlier on about things. I think for us as an organisation, I'm going to do a presentation on Monday about it in terms of feedback and communicating directly with whoever your team are, and just expressing, saying, look, this is I didn't like this, or I thought that was great, whatever it may be, but just expressing it, not in a emotive way, just explaining practically what the implications of it was.
Yeah, I couldn't be any more with you on that. And I think for me that goes in every aspect of your life. We all have relationships outside of life, and you can have a disagreement with a family member or your partner, for example, and you could spend days thinking about what's that person said or done, but actually if you just communicated it, which is the key to everything. So relationships in work, relationships outside of work, feedback, honesty, non-confrontational, non-aggressive, non-passive. It's just, but always, I always think it's really important to try and put everyone's perspective into that triangle before you try and have that conversation, so that you're trying to understand why they may have done something or why they may have said something before you approach it. But the more you can do honest and open feedback and frequent, the better. People will feel that in their own personal and career development. I always say, and I shouldn't say this because our HRD will should be disappointed in me, but she knows where I'm coming from. You shouldn't need an annual PDR because people should be talking all the time. You should know as a manager what all of your individuals in your team, what their aspirations are, what makes them tick, what their skill sets may be that they need to work on, and what their skill sets are that they're smashing it. And you should know that, and therefore you shouldn't need an annual PDR. But ultimately organisations do these things, don't they, to try and encourage communication where it isn't happening. But for me, that should just be a given.
Yeah, no, so it can fester even if it's a weekly thing that you're doing. It's still, it's a long time, isn't it, to be, you're thinking something, then when you actually speak about it, it's like, actually, no, it wasn't that, it was da-da-da. Oh, right, okay. Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Well, you might have been thinking about that for 2 nights while you've got home and you've over-processed it, and actually, it wasn't a thing.
Yeah. No, I think it's good. I think it's really good. So, no, look, I appreciate the insights on this. We've gone beyond some of the legal aspects. What, just as a closing thing, like what are the takeaways you would suggest to the listeners in terms of what we discussed earlier on?
So I would say in terms of what we discussed earlier on is in healthcare, the law stretches across so many aspects of it. Ultimately, one of the ones that people, talking about negativity, there is medical negligence that's part of it as well. There's also obviously making sure that you're effectively insured, that your terms and conditions are all right. So all of that in terms of protection, mechanics, you need to make sure all of that's in place. But ultimately, it will be about your business structure, making sure that's effective and that it's protecting you in the best way possible and maximising your value, and also your commercial agreements, and then back to your intellectual property. So those are the takeaways that I would say. But it's in every business, no matter what the sector are, there are obviously legalities that you need to overcome. So build your trusted advisor circle, get a good accountant and a good lawyer.
Great. Well, I'll put your details in below. You're a great person to work with personally as well as an organisation. So
thank you, and you, Andy. Thanks for inviting me.
No problem. Thanks, Pauline.
Thank you.